just so thrilled to have Garfield Gini-Newton here today, coming from Boise. As you can see, Associate Professor Teaching Stream there, and also a Senior National Consultant for the Critical Thinking Consortium. He has a new book out with Roland Case called Creative Thinking Classrooms, Leading Educational Change for the 21st Century. He's also, in a prior life, written 7 textbooks, as well as he, of course, is the author of many articles. But you might want, there are some copies of this, and you might want to take a look at this before you leave, or just ask him about it in the Q&A. So he will have an interactive workshop presentation for us, and so you will have a chance to talk, but then, of course, there will be, of course, time for discussion, too. So.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon. Hello. I read through the attendance list, so I have some sense of who's here and what departments. Let me just introduce myself a little more, and then I want to invite you, because I'm let you eat a little bit more. So as you see, I teach at OISE. The Critical Thinking Consortium began about 25 years ago at Simon Fraser University. And our work is to try to find ways to embed critical thinking at the core of learning from kindergarten through graduate school. And so our work takes us from, and it's fun working with 5-year-olds. Anyone have a 5-year-old at home? You know, how do we embed thinking when they're very young? What does that look like at a graduate school level and across? And the work is across Canada and internationally. It's fascinating. September, I was in Singapore, and 2 weeks later, I was in remote villages in the Andes. Talk about a difference. We're working with schools in remote villages where fairly high poverty, low scores, and embedding critical thinking in an after-school play-based approach. So it's quite fascinating. Given I don't speak much Spanish, and they actually speak Quechua anyway, not Spanish. First thing they said when I got out of the car, we started walking towards this group of kids came running towards us and said, "Gringo!" We're like, "Okay, welcome." Which we found out is not at all offensive to them. It's just, sorry, what was that? It was. They hugged us and we were welcomed in. And anyway, so we're going to talk a bit about this. And what I want to start off is if you could just share with me, if our goal is to put thinking at the core of learning, what are the barriers, like what with your students seem to be barriers that they encounter? You know, are they too eager to please and they're compliant as opposed to thinking? Do they lack perseverance? Like what would be the if you have challenges getting your students to think deeply, what would be at the root of those? What do you see as those challenges? If you could just take a minute and share a thought with someone beside you. And you may say you have lots of really strong students who don't, but where you do encounter either resistance or a challenge, what would be the barriers we have of putting thinking at the core of learning for students and they're embracing it? So we just take a minute to share a thought, okay? Perfect, okay, that's great. Okay, thank you. I've made my way around, got a sense both eavesdropping on your conversations and the challenges and what you teach. So now we'll tailor a few things. Did any of you attend a session? We were just chatting, so I just changed something on, remind me of the title, journal clubs?
Using learning journal clubs.
Did you attend?
The first session, Jason Brown.
So I wanted to show you, because we're going to talk a little bit about intellectual tools. Here's a sample tool that I was just posting. I teach a course on creativity and innovation, and I posted a reading on the neuroscience of creativity that they're looking at. And this is called a quadruple journal entry for reading text. And the idea is that the student, when they do their reading, they first have to pull a quote that resonates. You know, so what quote really kind of jumped out at you, stuck with you? Write a short response to the quote. How does it, in my case, it's connecting to education. Yours would be other issues. How do you see this connecting? Then, through that journal discussion with their groups and peers, they would add new thoughts based on, by the way, mine says post because we're doing it in an online environment right now. You may do it face-to-face. So after some conversation, what would I like to add to my initial thought? And finally, what's the connection you would make, in my case, to effective teaching practice, but that synthesis piece. So the quadruple journal entry, pull something out that resonated with you, give an initial response, engage in some discourse with your peers, and pull it together and make a connection back to the central issue we were looking at. And so I just wanted to show you that, and adding that into can be a tool that students can use to facilitate that kind of discussion and moving along. And by the way, to see the power of collaboration and peer feedback, I thought this initially, David said this, I hadn't really thought about that. Wow, that was really helpful. I'm going to add that to mine. That helped me lead to a richer, rather than focusing on my own. If that's useful, by the way, and I will send the PowerPoint, so if you want access, if this is useful. But if I put, that's a Word document. So I'm happy to send it as a Word document as well, so you can quickly edit out, posts or take education out, and in 2 minutes you can edit it. So I'll just try to remember to both send the PowerPoint as well as the Word document. Today's around looking at critical thinking and looking at assessments, kind of a dual focus. Did any of you attend a talk that Jeff Scott gave about a year ago at St. George campus? I know Carol Roheiser had Jeff Scott in from Australia. Well, I just summarized. Jeff Scott essentially did a survey in many countries internationally around university level, what makes powerful assessments. And he looked at what the responses were, and he tried to consolidate them. And here are some of the key pieces that emerged when we talk about powerful assessments. By the way, this research was all at the post-secondary level, so all university level. 4 things he found: real-world challenges, so that you have to apply what you're learning. You're learning whether it's biology or chemistry, but you're applying it in real-world challenges to solve unique or problematic situations. Okay, so you're taking what you're learning, applying them. But there are no clear solutions. You can't look this up. You can't go find it somewhere else. This needs a resolution. You have to figure out the solution. There should be sub-problems. So you have to break that more complex problem down into a series of problems that act as kind of building blocks. And that our focus on assessment isn't around correctness. It's around deep understanding and competence. That the response that you provide is less about correctness and more about deep understanding and competence. And let me just take for a moment, my wife's work is in math and critical thinking particularly. And one thing she's been exploring, there are some subject areas in which correctness matters. Would you agree? Like, I don't know that I want to go to a doctor who's going to estimate my prescription, correctness matters. I don't think I want to drive across a bridge where the engineer, rounded things. But there are times correctness matters. But what she's been playing with is this notion that there are 2 types of correctness. There's obviously correct and there's provably correct. Obviously correct is when I take a formula that I've memorized, I plug numbers in, I come up with an answer, and I get a correct answer. I don't understand what it means, but I've memorized my formula. Okay? Provably correct is the justification. Would it be fair to say, I think probably in high school and even younger, we're not doing enough to focus on justification. Would that be fair? I had a student a couple of years ago doing his grad paper, told me, I was always a strong math student. I had top marks and I almost failed out of math in university because I wasn't used to having to provide justifications. I knew my formulas, I plugged the numbers in, I didn't know what it meant. I couldn't check for reasonableness because I didn't deeply understand it. And so if I had the correct or incorrect. So notice here, we need to be looking at the soundness of your answer more than the correctness of your answer. And that's not to say correctness doesn't matter. It's can you justify what's the soundness of your answer. So I want just to show you these kind of 4 pieces and just layer in with that, putting thinking at the core of learning. Here are 4 comments. Art Costa, whose work is largely in habits of mind, made the comment a number of years ago that thinking is innate. We all think, humans think. Skillful thinking has to be cultivated. So notice the difference between you're thinking, but are you thinking skillfully? Are you using evidence? Are you carefully weighing that? My co-author, Roland Kay, said students who passively receive information are less likely to understand what they've heard or read than are students who have critically scrutinized, interpreted, applied, or tested information. We're going to touch on that as we go deeper into this. And I love Nell Nodding's comment from California. Nell Nodding said any subject, physics, art, or auto repair, can promote critical thinking as long as teachers teach in intellectually challenging ways. I think that's a really interesting comment. It's not the subject matter that promotes critical thinking, it's how we approach the subject matter. I can teach any subject as content delivery for you to memorize, and I can teach any subject in a way that engages you in thinking about that subject. So keeping in mind, all children can be engaged, all students can be engaged in thinking. So having said that, I want you to respond to this this statement. Agree, disagree, be in between. Teaching content should not be seen as a goal of education, but rather a necessary intellectual tool for solving problems, responding to provocative issues, or creating meaningful products or performances. I want you to take a minute and talk with someone beside you through the lens of your discipline, through your teaching. Do you agree or disagree, or are you in the middle? Teaching content should not be a goal of education, but rather a necessary intellectual tool for solving problems and solving issues. Take a minute and just reject it, accept it, say sometimes, maybe. Okay, just take a minute. I promised to drop this by and then I almost forgot.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to bring us back together. Let me hear your response. Should teaching content be our goal? Do you agree or disagree with the statement? It should not be our goal. Agree or disagree? I'm hearing you agree. It should not be the goal. Okay. Why not?
Because of the content in any case will be forgotten. What they will remember is how that works.
How it works, yeah.
Actually worked.
You want to agree or disagree, take a different position on it?
Well, I kind of agree with that. Like, you hear time and time again that everything that matters you learn on the job, and it's this, like, the thing that you can't teach is the soft side, the soft skills, and I would say, like, this is the ultimate,
Okay.
like, soft skill.
Okay. So everyone wants to take the other side. Content.
Not in this room.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is that statement for or against teaching content?
For.
Yeah, it's for teaching content. To say to you, content notice is necessary, I want you to remember, if you want to engage students in thinking critically, you can't think in a vacuum. You don't think about nothing. Right? And the flaw is if we think we're going to approach critical thinking as a topic. And by the way, quick aside, I got a call
maybe 6 or 8 months ago from the Toronto Star, and they said in Ireland they're beginning to teach critical thinking. They're teaching philosophy in elementary school to help kids be better thinkers in a world of fake news and so on. Are we doing that in Ontario? And I said, well, no. I mean, you could weave it in, but we don't have a subject. And then I went on to say, nor should we. Because what you're doing is you're isolating thinking. Well, for this 45 minutes of the day, we're going to think. And now we're going to go down to our other class. Well, no, we did our thinking over there. Thinking has to be embedded. We shouldn't be teaching thinking as some kind of separate piece and then learning content over here. How about we teach kids to think about the content? By the way, the dichotomy I always hear is as if we have a choice between teaching content or teaching thinking. And as a result, we see the pendulum keep swinging. And I'm going to say to you, teach content in the way that engages thinking. I'll show you some strategies. But I would argue we want an embedded approach, not I'll teach content and then we'll teach you to think over here. Thinking should be an embedded part of what we do. I want to link this because today we're here talking a bit about assessment. How many of you have worked with, know about Bloom's taxonomy? Has it come up for people? So this may sound a bit heretical. In the Critical Thinking Consortium, we're not big fans of Bloom's taxonomy. So I just, and I'm probably somewhat alone even at OASI in this regard. Although I'm beginning to see articles starting to emerge challenging. First of all, you need to understand Bloom's taxonomy was created in the 1956. It was an assessment typology. It was designed for us to say, if you don't understand the questions you're creating, the cognitive demands of the question, you can't assess fairly. If you thought that was a recall question, but it really required synthesis, that's a more challenging question. If you don't understand the nature of the question, then our assessments are not fair. So when Bloom created this, it was, and I like it for that use, to say, what is this question demanding of the students to be able to answer it? but we've tended to adopt it as a pedagogical approach. And as a pedagogical approach, it suggests that first we work on content delivery, and when we filled your head with enough information, we'll work our way up to the top. And by the way, notice what resides at the top. And as a result, we talk about high order and low order thinking. I'm going to suggest to you things we typically call low order thinking are simply thoughtless. Copying notes off a board are not, there's no frontal lobe activity. In fact, today it's probably take out your phone and take a picture of that. There's no frontal lobe engagement going on here. So what I want to suggest to you is that we want to move away from this to say, but thinking should be at the core. And I'm going to try to make the case that thinking isn't what we do after we filled your head with information. It's, by the way, that whole media literacy piece has to be kids going, can I trust what I'm reading now? Not after I filled my head with all the information, right? It's an in the moment. And I want to suggest we want to move from what I would call knowledge hierarchies. My experience is many students assume if it's in a textbook, it's true. Is that fair? If it's in the especially if you wrote the text, right? I actually I asked a question and I had a student answer, and I said, and how do you know that? And she said, it's in the textbook. And I said, how do you know the textbook's got it right? Well, you wrote it, right? So I said, yeah, but I didn't research that stuff. I just made it up. I mean, I was busy, right? And she looked really stressed. I said, I'm kidding. But stop assuming because someone wrote it in a text, it is now some kind of truth. You should challenge the text, question the text. So what I want is move from a knowledge hierarchy to what we would call, moving towards what we call knowledge networks. And with knowledge networks, we want to, the lighting circuit, we want to put provocative questions at the core of learning, at the beginning, at the outset. And I want you to engage with this challenging question. And you might reflect on what you already know or think you know. You might start by sharing what you know, then reflecting on that. Notice this is a more organic process. It isn't necessarily handing over information before we invite kids to think. Now, I want to get very practical or concrete. I do want to show you, I love this, David Weinberger has a book, he wrote this about 4 years ago called Too Big to Know. His central premise is that in the digital world there is so much information, it's hard for any one person to know everything about. I love his subtitle, the smartest person in the room is the room. And by the room, he doesn't mean these four walls. He means a virtual, like whoever's in that virtual space of learning or real space of learning. If you want to solve complex problems, you put your heads together, you'll get far further. That quadruple journal entry is an example of trying to say, if I could kick this idea, how many of you get ideas and you want someone to go kick it around with? Do you get that point where you just, okay, I've got an idea germinating, but I need to float it out there and get someone to challenge it and question it and unpack it. I always get to a point where, okay, I've got an idea. I can't take it further now until I can talk with somebody about it, right? And that's that phase of learning. So this is my quick advice up front, and then we'll get into what it looks like more practically. If we want to create a thinking classroom, I start with problematize everything. Like there's not a thing in my class that I can't find a way to say all of this is going to be a problem to solve. My problem is not at the end, after you've learned stuff, I'll give you a problem. I'm going to start with that. We're going to talk about framing questions, so they invite a thoughtful response. Understanding, does that question actually invite critical thinking, or does that question invite me to go look it up? And we'll talk about that. I'm going to suggest to you that we launch learning with an authentic challenge, that we don't make the task the result, we make the task the invitation to start learning. You saw in Jeff Scott's work that we want to sequence a series of sub-inquiries that will build that. And lastly, I want to urge us to think about, absolutely we need to build content knowledge. I have no question in my mind at all. But how can I do that that will engage thinking and help build conceptual understanding? Okay? So how do I move from I have to hand over information to I have to engage you in thinking about information? So let's explore that a little bit. I'm just going to jump by this. I wanted to show you, one of the reasons I need to start here is our experience as being critical thinking is widely valued. It doesn't matter where we go in the world. Critical thinking is a hot issue these days. People are interested in it. But we also find there's lots of confusion about what it actually means. So ask a variety of people, you'll get a variety of answers. Richard Paul in California surveyed, 10 years, or 20 years ago now, UCLA, Berkeley, Stanford, and so on. He surveyed professors across California about critical thinking, and here's what he found. 89% agreed that critical thinking is a primary educational objective. Okay? So widespread agreement, it's really important, but only 19% could explain what it meant. 78% said that students lacked the criteria they needed to assess their own thinking, but again, when pressed, only 8% could enumerate the intellectual criteria that should be used. 82% of the faculty involved their students thinking critically at least once per class, but only 15% required it in writing. And finally, 77% of the faculty had little or no idea how they could reconcile covering the content they needed to cover while still fostering critical thinking. Okay? Now, 3 of those actually came from Richard Paul's study. 1 of them I made up. So your challenge is to tell me which of those is the false statement. Which did I make up? Okay? By the way, 2 clues. Which of those does not fit with my title, that critical thinking is often misunderstood? And if you've ever watched Sesame Street, 3 of those belong together, 1 just doesn't belong there. Which doesn't fit with the other 3? Which fit together and which don't? Take a couple of minutes, talk to each other, see if you can figure out which statement did I make up, which is the false statement. All right, let's see how we're doing. How many of you picked number 1? How many of you think I made up number 1? No takers. Okay, how about number 2? No takers. All right, how about number 3? And how about number 4? Okay, the majority of you are right. It was number 3. How did you know? Why doesn't it fit? Yeah, there's no contradiction. There's no reference to them not understanding. Okay, give me another way. What led you to say, I don't think that would make sense? What else gave it away?
Well, the others are predicated on faculty not knowing what critical thinking is. So if they're involving critical thinking at least once per class, that involves them.
Okay, so the others all said they didn't understand it, but yet they're doing it. So that didn't make sense. Anyone pick up on the 15% writing? What'd you have to say about that?
It assumes that critical thinking always involves writing.
Yeah, that's an erroneous statement. Who cares whether it was in writing or not? By the way, I just use this as an exercise. I've been saying to you, I can embed critical thinking in anything I do. I just did a note-taking exercise with you. I just problematized something simple as note-taking, but I threw in something that didn't make sense. By the way, I want you to notice, when I said to you, I very intentionally said, talk with each other, see if you can find the false statement. What did many of you do before you talked to anyone? How many of you reread them? Even though I read them to you, I watched, you were paying attention. Why'd you need to reread them?
You've got a different lens.
Yeah, I want you to think about it. If I put up a note and I read to my students quickly copy it down, there's not a whole lot of processing going on. They're just copying it down. But if I say, but there's a false statement up there, can you figure it out? I've just engaged you in thinking. I'm trying to make the case to you, critical thinking does not have to wait until I finished a lecture and think at the end. I just embedded it. By the way, if you don't have a provocation, this won't work. If I don't have a purpose for the note that you understand, I have to have a problem to solve that's driving my lesson. But if I do, by the way, here's another way I can do this. Here are 6 facts, all true. Today I didn't put a false one up. They're not all important. I want you to only copy 4 down. Turn to a partner, decide which 2 you're not going to put in your notes. I just embedded a choice that you have to make in light of evidence. What I'm showing you, these are strategies I can use on a routine basis where thinking suddenly is part of what we do every day. And by the way, I don't care if there are 500 people in that class. Turn to a partner, talk to them, decide which 2 you'll cross out. I want you to know at the end of the day, I'm not that worried about whether you picked the same one I picked. I care that you read and thought more deeply. We could disagree on why one's more important than the other. At least I've got you thinking about the content.
So I'm just going to say, what people, perception of what is critical thinking and how it manifests is not always on the page.
Yeah.
In brief look at, like the last one, 77% of faculty had little or no conception of how to reconcile.
And how we do?
Telling me that it's not valued. So my conclusion was, it's got to be valued, but misunderstood. I don't see it being valued.
Okay, beautiful.
There's a disconnect in my mind that's different from the rest of the room.
Sure. And I'm going to move on, but I love what you're just doing because you're just proving to me, had I just shown you this slide, read it, and moved on, we would have all copied that down and went out very happy. Oh, I got these notes today from the session. But I paused and said, which one's a false statement? And look at the thinking you just did as you worked through that. Great. Like, you know, I'm standing up and going, hey, this really worked because I got you thinking a way I didn't even anticipate. So and I'm going to answer your question in a moment, but I wanted to show you thinking can happen anytime, any class. So our frame around a critical, what do we talk about, a thinking classroom? We use this phrase, it's where students learn to think and think to learn. We know that the learning is always deeper if I'm engaged in thinking what I'm learning about. I'm more likely to retain information, I'm more likely to understand information if I had to think to learn that information. But at the same time, we have to teach kids how to think to learn. Okay? Because not all students know how to do that learning. So we have to both embed it and use it as a way of teaching to deepen their understanding. So what does that look like? Well, let me give you this one more challenge. This photograph was taken about 1890. It's the Toronto to Richmond Hill Stagecoach line, and that's at the intersection of Yonge and Steeles. Your challenge is to tell me what month this photograph was taken, what day of the week this photograph was taken, and approximately what time of day within about an hour. I'm looking for the month, the day of the week, and the time of day. Okay? Talk with each other. See what you have. Don't ignore any clues because they don't fit your answer. Use all the evidence to come up with an answer. See if you can tell me the month, day of the week, and time of day. Okay? Give you a few minutes to seek out some answers. Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. I told you that's the corner of Yonge and Steeles. It's actually the northwest corner of Yonge and Steeles. If anyone knows the area, I think Centrepoint Mall's straight south. I think there's an Office Depot or something there on the corner, something like that. Am I got that right? Because that's the northwest corner. All right, I'm going to get you to toss out for me. Tell me what month this is. Just shout out. July. Okay, we'll come back and we'll have a different month. You agreed with July? September. Early or late? Early September. July. Anyone want to take a different month?
Late August.
Late August. Okay. What month? Cheryl?
Oh, no, sorry.
No, you're still working on the, okay?
I'm thinking of this.
You're thinking ahead. Okay. Day of the week. Let's start with, is it a weekday or a weekend?
Weekday.
Did I hear, I got weekday here. Anyone say it's a weekend?
Weekend.
If it's a weekend, is it Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday.
Anyone think it's Sunday? Anyone think it's definitely not Sunday? Definitely not Sunday? Okay. Time of day, within about an hour. 10 in the morning. 11 in the morning? Okay. 9 in the morning? How late in the afternoon?
Mid-ish? No, later in the afternoon.
Later in the afternoon. Okay, I'm gonna back up, and I want to go to as your question. How do we know this? By the way, when we do an exercise like this with the students, depending on the situation, we'll often use a 5W chart. You know, who's in the picture, what's happening. But the key thing, what do you observe, and what can you infer? And I want you to think about this. It doesn't matter what discipline. If I'm doing a lab, what did you see happen? What can you infer from what you saw? What conclusion can you draw? Whether I'm reading, and when you're reading, what did you read on the line? What do you have to infer to make sense of that reading? What conclusion can you draw? Almost any subject area, what observation, inference. I find even senior students will often give me an observation but not an inference, or they'll jump to an inference and they don't support it with an observation. I want to get them routinely being able to say, I see this, that suggests this, therefore I think I can conclude this. It's just a very routine thing we need to get kids doing. So let me hear from you. Why is this not October? Let me start there. Because I had July, late August, so we basically had July up to early September. So why did you not go with October, let's say? What evidence do you have that it's not? The leaves. Okay. There's none on the ground. They still look fairly dark. Okay. Is there other evidence that would support that it's not May or October? Sorry? Okay. 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 Is there anything else that would help?
Sleeves are down. Cheryl was pointing out that
Here. So suggesting it's a little bit later into the fall than midsummer. Interesting. Why is it not early May, besides the leaves? Is there anything else up there that would confirm? Sorry? How do you know that? By the way, that's a great inference. What's your observation that supports that? How do you know it's dry? No puddles. Would the horses be that white? Note observation, the horses look pretty clean. Inference, I don't think the roads are very muddy and wet, otherwise they'd be covered in dirt. That tells me it must be a drier part of the year. Observation, inference, conclusion. How about the day of the week? Why did some of you say it's not Sunday? What is that? Observation, I see an apron. Inference? That's work. If it was Sunday, you would expect them to be in a Sunday bonnet for church, dress. Okay, so this doesn't look like a Sunday because they're dressed for work. Is there other evidence that would support that this is a work day and not Sunday?
They clearly look like they're waiting what to do.
So, I like the way you label this the TTC. So this is a working day clearly, and we're assuming, by the way, making sure we surface assumptions, might be a sound assumption, but you're assuming we didn't work on Sundays, okay, which may be true. How about the time of day? Okay, what about the shadow? Note observation. What do you tell me about the shadow? Okay. Which means it has to be the morning. Okay. Early or late? Because I had 9 o'clock. I had, I think, up to 11 o'clock. Because you're saying they're rather just kind of short. If that were 9 o'clock, you'd think it's a longer shadow. But you're saying it's a shorter, so I think it's closer to midday. Okay, other thought?
I think it's earlier because
Okay.
I think they're mistakenly seeing the shadow of the tree as a short little stump there, but I think the larger part of the tree is shadowing the house.
Ah, okay.
The sun is lower in the sky, meaning earlier in the morning.
Okay. Should I give you the answer? Take a minute, please. If you did an exercise like this with students, why should we not give them the answer? Okay, just take a minute. Why should you not give the answer? Just talk with each other just for a minute. Okay, give me a reason I should not give the answer. Why should I not?
The object of the exercise is to actually talk through it. It doesn't really matter about a right answer or a wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to undermine my whole activity when I now make it about the right answer. All right? So you're saying, don't, if I give the answer, I've undermined my own. Okay?
Yeah.
Another reason you would not give the answer. Okay, if I give the answer, the thinking stops. It's over. If I don't, you continue to reflect and wonder. Okay? If any of you taught students where if I give the answer, next time they'll just wait me out. You're going to tell us anyway, so why should I invest time thinking? You're just going to tell me. So I won't bother to do the thinking. Okay. Any of you still want to know the answer? Okay. By the way, often we have both types of students sitting in our classes. Some who are saying, no, don't tell me, I'm still thinking about it. And then we have students who are frustrated because you don't tell them. By the way, we can create cynical students. Well, you never tell answers anyway, so why bother investing the time? There's never an answer. How do you reconcile this? There are both reasons to not give and to give. What do you do? Okay. I'll give you part of the answer. You see if it makes sense with the, okay? And the other?
Well, in this case, the answer doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's a kind of open, like the point was in the thinking and the...
And by the way, if you go online and find this picture, it didn't record the month, day of the week, and time of day. It recorded what I've told you. I'm going to tell you, as a historian, how much history is built on, given the evidence we have, this is the conclusion. Is that not how science works? Given the available evidence, until something challenges it, this is what the evidence seems to be suggesting. Right? Is there a ironclad answer? There are, we call them laws eventually, but for the most part, kids have to make sense of. By the way, I want to show you this for a couple of reasons. One is, I said to you earlier, we should be focused on the quality of thinking. See, I misled you. I said, should I give you the answer? I don't have the answer. But I should have asked, should I offer a sound answer? Because our focus with kids should be, I want you to develop a sound answer in response to this question. Note there's a range from sound to weak. You want to go to the extreme. This is not midnight in February. That would be a weak answer. It is not likely mid-May. The leaves are too full. We have evidence. A reasonable answer lies somewhere in here, and here's my evidence. By the way, this is just an engaging way to model what you can do in all of our classes, how we get kids thinking about what would be a sound answer, not a correct answer. I want to point out a couple of other things. One is I used a black and white photograph intentionally because I just had all of you looking closely at a picture that really is quite boring. Would you agree? Like, that's not a riveting picture. But by problematizing it, the brain loves to solve puzzles. You want proof? Has anyone been to an escape room? Yeah. People pay money to be locked in a room to have to think their way out, right? Like, think about that. We're paying money to make me think, and people love it, right? Solving puzzles, the brain inherently likes to solve puzzles. By giving you a problem to solve, I engaged you in thinking about this. And I was using something called additive teaching. I gave you the problem first, you got talking about it, and then I stepped in and said, oh, I forgot to mention something. And I gave you the direction. I never told you where the sun was. I just dropped in. When I knew people were talking about the shadows, I stepped in and I dropped in a new piece of information. So notice if I were to start with a provocative question in a class, in each lecture there's going to be some more information that's going to help you solve that case study I've given you. Right? The reason you come to class is every class you'll get another piece of the puzzle that will unlock and help you answer that question. It's an additive approach as opposed to when we've covered all the content, then I'll give you a problem to solve. Okay? So in an additive way, the problem drives the learning, and each class will uncover new pieces to help you solve it. So I want to get to getting back to your question about what is critical thinking and what the definition at least we're going to use. Oops, sorry, that didn't come back up. The confusion that we find, especially among students, is that they think critical thinking is to criticize, to be critical. I don't know if you've encountered that, but often critical thinking is seen to be the root they believe is critical or criticize. Not true. The actual root of the word critical for critical thinking comes from the Greek word meaning criteria. Critical thinking is to render an assessment or a judgment. So if my question does not invite you to make a decision, to make a judgment of some kind, I haven't invited critical thinking. And it needs to use criteria to help base that thinking on. So let me give you an example. Tell me a movie you've seen recently that you really liked. Hidden Figures. Okay. Was it a well-made film? Should it win awards? Okay. By the way, notice these are two different questions. Tell me a movie you liked, preference. Was it a well-made film? Someone tell me a film you liked and it really wasn't very good. Okay, give me one. Like, they're Friday night movies. I'm tired. I don't want to have to think. I just want to plug in what's your Friday night pick for the week?
Anything with Seth Rogen?
Okay. And you're going to say, that was really funny, and it should never win an award. Notice, critical thinking is you saying, I recognize using a set of criteria, which in this case may be implicit. Great films meet a set of criteria. This does not meet the criteria. It doesn't mean I didn't like it. It's still fun. My daughter's in her 4th year of a neuroscience program here at U of T, and one of her favorite shows is The Bachelorette, or The Bachelor, I don't know, one or the other. And I was saying, Nikita, seriously? She says, Dad, I have to think at this level all week. Give me a break. This is thoughtless television, and that's what I need now. Don't you have that point where you just go, yeah, I watch this because it doesn't make me think, and no, I don't have any delusions that it's good TV, right? Critical thinking is when I apply a set of criteria to help me make a thoughtful decision. So again, there's a difference between did you like something, was it, going out for dinner. I can go where I have a craving, preference, or I could use a set of criteria to make a judgment. Give me some criteria you would use to decide, I want to take some people out of town who are visiting. I want to take them to a good restaurant. What would your criteria be? Where do you take guests from out of town when you want to treat them to a really top-notch restaurant? What's your criteria?
With my father, wherever it's cheap.
Okay, so, but it might be like who's picking up the tab, the university or me, right? So is it affordable? Give me another criteria.
Something new they haven't tried.
Okay, so they've got unique dishes, so it's not just the same old. Okay, give me something else, another criteria. Sorry?
A Yelp review.
Okay, so I want to look, it's got good reviews from other people. Anything else? Yeah, the ambiance. By the way, if your 2-year-old's going with you, does that change where you're going? Right? Notice here we're using criteria to help us make a decision. So the definition we use to answer the question from earlier, critical thinking is when we engage our students in a problematic situation. We problematize the learning, so we require them to make a decision about what to believe or how to act using intellectual tools for thinking. And what I want to touch on just for a moment, and we'll get back, this is the framework that we've developed that we work to support critical thinking in classrooms. One is, and the starting point, how do we create the climate where thinking is encouraged and supported? By the way, notice earlier I said, should I give you the answer? And you told me why not. One of the reasons why not is I will undermine a community of thinkers. You know, if this is a community, if I create winners and losers, you got it right and you got it wrong, you don't want to do this next time because I really worked hard at that and I was told I was wrong. If I want to create a climate for thinking, then we have to see it's safe to take chances. By the way, you might have noticed when I asked you, here are 4 choices, which of these is the wrong statement, remember that? I don't know if you noticed, but I very intentionally said, how many of you picked 1? How many of you picked 2? Had I not, if I said, okay, which one do you think is the right answer? And you said 2. Now I'm stuck having to go, no, you're wrong. Okay, someone else. And that's not a safe place for me to take a chance. By saying, how many of you picked 1, 2, 3, 4, notice then I was able to say, well, those of you picked 3 were right. How did you know? And I 0-1. I don't embarrass someone who didn't get the right answer, and we had a conversation about how we knew that. So these are all kind of conscious things I do in my class. By the way, encouraging just think, pair, share. Turn and talk to one other person. I'm stumped. I don't have an idea, but when I talk for a few minutes, oh, I got an idea from this. So what are we doing in our class to create that climate where thinking is encouraged, supported, safe? So if I get it wrong, it's okay. How do I create the opportunities? That's where we're going to go next. How do I tweak our questions, make sure our questions invite thinking? But I want to be clear on one thing. We're going to talk about how we frame the learning around invitations to think. If we don't build the intellectual tools kids need, you still won't get good answers. Just because I ask better questions doesn't mean I get better answers. So what we've identified are 5 intellectual tools. If we hope students are going to think deeply, remember we talked about this already, one tool is background knowledge. You can't think about nothing. I come into your class, if I don't know about the subject matter, you can't expect me to write a deeply profound paper. I don't know the content. So we have to teach content. Our goal is how do we teach content in a way that's problematized? How do I teach content that engages thinking? I'll show a few examples. I just talked about the importance of criteria. These are the 2 pillars of all critical thinking. Do I have something to think about? Do I have criteria to guide me in my thinking? Okay, those are the 2 pillars. Critical thinking vocabulary. By this, I want to be clear. Can you toss out a physics term for me?
Term?
Yeah, what's a term I'd have?
Momentum, energy.
Okay, momentum, energy, those are background knowledge. Okay? They're not what we would call critical thinking vocabulary. Here I mean, what can you infer? And if I don't know what an inference is, I can't do your question. Evaluate the following, which means something different in math than it does in a literature course. If I don't know the meaning of that word, then I get stuck. Have you had students stumped on, they didn't understand the question? I studied, I knew my content for this exam. I didn't really understand what the question was asking because I didn't understand the language. And sometimes we have to unpack with students, what does it mean when you're asked to do this? Okay? So I'm going to try to show you some thinking strategies. How do we help students learn to gather evidence in a way that connects to the criteria? They detect patterns, they can make connections, that they don't just have a bunch of information they're overwhelmed with, they have a way to organize it. We'll talk about that. And we work with 19 habits, and let me clarify, these I can teach. You can't teach a habit. Okay, so habits are called this because they have to become habitual over time. Attention to detail. For how many of you would your discipline, would attention to detail be a very important habit that they develop? Right? Math and sciences definitely, right? Languages, How about perseverance? For how many of your subject areas, disciplines, is perseverance an important habit? I can tell you in all the research, it's one of the top in any. You want students to be successful in life? They need to learn perseverance. You probably know the stat. My daughter had 1,800 students in her first year bio class at St. George, and 600 were left at Christmas. And I always think about all of those kids came out of high school with marks 85 and up. You don't get into U of T science program. So where's the difference? Perseverance. Which kids had the resilience, the willingness to stick it out, the okay to fail something and pick yourself up? Like that's how do we develop that in kids? How about empathy? Is it one of the top? What disciplines do you think empathy? Climate change. Does empathy matter? See, I would think it would. Thinking about what areas of the world are going to be most impacted and not saying, well, that's not me, so I'm not worried about it. Right? You have to show some empathy. Is empathy important in physics? Yeah, it may not be. By the way, it's not that it's not there, but if I said you get to pick 5 out of 19, it's not at the top. Why do I say this? And I'm happy to, if you'd like the list of 19, I could send them out. I think it's actually a great department conversation to say, here are the 19 habits. If we were to pick 5 to focus on in our department, what 5 are really central to doing our discipline? Because you can't do all 19. Like if you said, oh, I have to touch on all of these, great, all you're doing is introducing your students to the term. If it's going to become a habit, what do you do routinely that nurtures attention to detail? If that's important, what am I doing routinely? If perseverance matters, how is my assessment set up to nurture perseverance? So those are the 5 tools we work with. I want to start by looking at how we make sure we're framing our questions as invitations to think. If you would just read the type 1 questions. What do you notice about all the type 1 questions? What do they share in common? So how could you throw out a word that would describe them? Just type 1. Recall. The recall? Okay.
Some among men.
Yeah? Okay. Typically, how many correct answers are there? Is it open or closed? What are 3 activities in Berlin? There could be a lot of activities. I can pick 3. What about, by the way, when I listed 3 activities, do I need to make a decision? There's no decision, right? I didn't ask you for a favorite or what are 3 activities. What about 2? Do I have to make a decision in 2? Yeah? How do you make the decision? Personal. How many wrong answers could there be in 2? Yeah, you can't be wrong, right? This is completely open. You can say what you want. Does anybody know what Bertie Bott beans are? Can you help out those who don't know what Bertie Bott beans are? From Harry Potter? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they're jelly beans.
And they have vomit flavor.
Yeah, okay. You don't know until you bite them what flavor, and it might be Tutti Frutti or Lemon Drop, or it might be vomit or earwax. If I brought a box in, and I said, here, try these, and you said, oh, I like the earwax, are you wrong? It's kind of weird, right? Like, if you like earwax, you like earwax. You're not wrong, it's a preference. What about when I move to 3? Do I need to make a decision? Is this decision wide open, like 2? Would you accept any answer? So they're open, but not completely open. What would put a limit on what we would consider a reasonable answer? Like what would I have to use to arrive at a sound answer here?
Health issues.
Okay, you're getting into the specifics. I mean more generally, when you answer a type 3 question, I'd have to have some criteria. You ask about my family's needs. Well, what criteria would meet my family's need? What else do I need? I'd have to research. I'd have to have some evidence. I've established these 4 criteria to meet my family's needs. I need to go find out in each of those cities which one best. Notice here I need criteria and evidence. Our students need to always be thinking about how you're making that judgment, how the criteria inform you. I want to show you an example of a question. Is this a 1, 2, or a 3? Is Hamlet a sympathetic character in your eyes? 1, 2, or 3? Why 2? Okay, I love the fact that I got some saying, I think that's a 3, and some saying it's a 2. What words in that cause you to think it's a 2? In your eyes. It's meant to be a 3, but we stick in your eyes on the end, and what do students think? Oh, I get to say what I want now. When what do I really want from this question? I want evidence and criteria. I want the text to support. What I'm showing you is we often add, and I'll often see it the other way, in your opinion, and then we ask a question. Well, first of all, in your eyes is redundant. And it's not even helpfully redundant. It just complicates the question, because now suddenly students think, oh, I get to tell you how I feel about something. My advice, as soon as you see in your opinion, cross it out, because we actually don't care. I care that you're using evidence from the text to support your answer. In science, I care that you're using the data. This is not in your opinion, is climate change real? This is not an in your opinion question. This is, does the data suggest, use the evidence, right? What we want to do, by the way, I often have people tell me this, but if I ask, is Hamlet a sympathetic character, they're afraid students will say yes or no. And I ask, okay, so that's the question 30% of your final exam. Are you writing yes? I think we would infer, by the way, what we need students to see, whenever you have a question that asks you to make a judgment of any kind, what are 2 things you should immediately say, oh, then I'm going to need what? Criteria and evidence. This should become routine in students' mind. Whenever I see a question that asks me to make a judgment, I need evidence and criteria. Okay? So for example, by the way, how often will we write, is Hamlet a sympathetic character? What do we tack on the end so we don't get yes or no? Discuss, defend, support. Have you marked papers where they obviously just start to write everything they could think of? No organization, no structure, it's just a dump of information. What if I ask, is Hamlet a sympathetic character? Identify 3 criteria for sympathetic and use evidence to support. Get students trained to start thinking about, if those are my criteria, which criteria does this evidence fit with? And they start mapping out, okay, my first section, I'm going to deal with this criteria, and I'm going to use this evidence to build that argument. Then I'm going to move to this argument using this criteria. It starts to give them a structure around writing as opposed to just defend your answer. Okay? Students who are struggling with writing, they try to hold a bunch of information, and then you get an information dump on the page. Poorly structured. Criteria can become our way to help kids structure. Let me show you another. Which of the theories used by scientists to explain the dinosaur's disappearance from the face of the earth is most plausible? 1, 2, or 3? Okay. So give me, I think there are at least 2 words or phrases that tell me that. Which one? You just gave me one. Yeah, most plausible. Okay, which theory tells me I have to make a choice? And most plausible tells me I need criteria. The first thing I should be doing, pausing, going, well, what's my criteria for a plausible theory? Should be my first step. I have to decide what's most plausible, not my favorite, not one I like the most. What makes a plausible theory? When I weigh the evidence against that criteria, I make a judgment. Okay? My next example is clearly a 1. Make it a 3. Because I can look that up, right? You probably taught it, it's in a textbook, I can Google it. What would that, make that a 3?
What are the 3 most efficient methods?
Okay, most efficient. Now that strikes me as that's a good question coming from management. We want to maximize profits. What would be the most efficient? Change the lens.
Most environmentally friendly.
So if I look at it from sustainability lens, I may change it. What about labor? What question might labor ask?
Easiest way.
Safest, right? By the way, imagine if my class was divided into 3 groups. You're going to explore the most efficient, the most sustainable, and the safest. And now you have to negotiate a win-win solution that integrates those 3 perspectives into a solution that there's still profits to be made in a safe way, an environmentally sound way. What would your solution be? And we would open that up versus recall or retrieve information. So this is just a quick guide of looking at attributes of critical thinking. 4 things we look for if you're ever looking at a question saying, is this critical thinking? Are there options to consider? Yes, I provided 3. This is believable, not believable. That I'm making a judgment among options. Does my question require a judgment? That students have to weigh options, make a judgment. Does it require the use of criteria in making that decision? And does it require the use of evidence? So 4 key things. Any critical thinking question invites me to make a judgment of some kind, okay, making a reasoned judgment using criteria and evidence. Those are 4 things that we would always look for. So I want to show you, we have found that essentially any critical thinking question you ask will take one of 6 forms. Critical thinking it can be clustered into these 6 forms. When I asked you to tell me the month, day of the week, and time of day, you were doing a decode the puzzle. Anytime we ask students to solve something, an enigmatic situation, making sense of a piece of text is a decode the puzzle. You know, what's the message, author's message in this? How do you know? What evidence? Much of the work you must do in labs is a decode. How do you explain that? Why did that just happen? When we try to understand things around, we're decoding. When we critique, we're applying a set of criteria to a person, an event, a study, you know, one of something. And by the way, note critique and judge are the same type of critical thinking. One just has you weighing more than one, two or more options, and the other focuses. So if I said, is Justin Trudeau an effective leader, I'd be doing a critique. Who is a more effective leader, Justin Trudeau or Donald Trump, is not even a fair question. No, I shouldn't politicize things. If I ask you 2 or more leaders, we'd be here. We'd be in a judge the better or best. So, by the way, those of you who are supporting students in acquiring English, I'm probably going to, with your students in the early language, I'm going to go with critique because you're going to cover less ground. If I'm going to ask you to compare 3 studies, you have to read and understand 3 studies. I might say just let's critique one study. Is this study sound in its conclusions? Whereas I might say to another student, I want you to compare these 3 studies and argue which one is most sound. See how one is a wider body? By the way, notice what we're doing here saying, but I don't take the thinking out from any student. All students are invited to think, but I might tighten up or expand, creating greater complexity or not. Rework. When we ask students, what if we changed the variable? What if we altered something? What if we, in the picture I showed you, I want you to redraw that picture, but it's now winter. What would have changed in the picture? Rewrite the ending of a story. So they think differently. Anything you do that you mark is going to be a design. Writing a lab report, writing a paper, preparing a PowerPoint. These are all designed to specs. And we have criteria. A sound lab report has to meet these criteria. A well-written paper has these criteria. Perform to specs. When I was preparing for today, I was doing a design to specs. When I'm up here, I'm performing to specs, which means I'm watching the time, saying, okay, I'm not going to cover everything. What will I cut out or not cut out? Am I going too fast? I try to, you watch your class, you monitor them, you make adjustments. If your students do a presentation, they're performing to specs. By the way, I would argue writing exams is a perform to specs. Would you agree? If I'm well prepared, but I don't monitor my time, if I don't know how to take an exam, all my preparation might be wasted because I spent too much time in the first part. I didn't answer the question thoroughly. I had a superficial answer. Getting kids to be able to monitor themselves. It's been great to watch our daughter through university be able to come out and say, I think my mark will be somewhere between here and here. I've been able to analyze all of them, looked at them up. Like, she really self-regulates very well and has a pretty sound understanding of how she's doing. That's a perform to spec. She monitors her work. I want to show you just a couple of examples. The top line are all whammy knackers, but none of the middle line are whammy knackers, or any of the bottom line whammy knackers. So I'm going to start off by asking you to tell me what makes a whammy knacker a whammy knacker. Okay, so take a look, take a close look. Tell me what all whammy knackers share in common. So shout out for me. What do you notice they all have? Yeah.
What's the matter? Right?
Whammy knacker is just a silly word, and those are whammy knackers, and that's all I get. So just looking at the top row. No, it's not. That top row, what do they all share in common? What does tell me what they do have? What do you notice all the top line share? 4 body parts. 1 tail. 4 feet, 4 legs. Heads, what color are the heads? They're always yellow. Okay? Why is this not a whammy knacker? Too many parts. Why is this not a whammy knacker? Too few. Now this one has a yellow head, a tail, 4 legs, 4 body parts. has all the attributes of a Wamianacker you just mentioned. Why is it not a Wamianacker? Does the shape of the head seem to matter? Here, I want you to compare this one and the one above. What's different? Because they're pretty similar. Can anyone find a difference in those two?
Shape of their head and the expression on their face.
Okay. Okay, which one's different then? Which body part? In this one. You're saying this one, all the body parts are colored. In this one, which one's not? Okay, what can you tell me about all Wamianackers? Taking a look at where you're going with the body parts.
They cannot have a fully round head.
Okay, perhaps. I want you to stay with the color for a moment.
The color is number 4 and the first row on the third. One color of the body.
Okay, the third is always dark red.
The third is always, say it again?
Always dark red.
In a Wamianacker, the third segment is always red. Is this a Wamianacker? Yes. Is this a Wamianacker? Okay. More importantly, because Wamianackers are completely silly, which of these 6 critical thinking exercises did we just do? That was a decode. What would a design be? Sorry? Yeah, if I asked you to add another Wamianacker that meets those attributes but is different than what's up there, that would be a design. Okay? But this was a decode. You had to look for attributes. By the way, this is called concept attainment. The strategy, we present yes examples, no examples, and testers. It's the most basic way children learn from a very young age, and it can be the most complex. Here are all yes examples. These are all no examples. By the way, when I do this, I don't teach the answer. I walk you through it, and by the end, you will leave my class with a conceptual understanding and a definition. Let me move this same strategy. I'm hoping, we have a lot of math science people. Does anyone here not remember like terms? It's like grade 9 math. Anyone not remember what a like term is in math? Perfect. You're going to be our tester for this. This is a like term. This is not. What's different? No, go ahead. What's different? Okay. So the A, by the way, if students didn't know, A, we call it the variable. The variables are the same. Here they're not. The coefficient or the number can be different, but the variable has to remain the same. Okay, so we write that rule down. Okay, so that's one. Does your reasoning still hold here? So here's another yes example of a like term, and this is a no example. Does that reasoning work? Yeah. So the variables remain the same. What else do we learn with our second example? So we know that the variable has to remain constant, but it doesn't matter about the coefficient. Can you tell me anything else? Doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. Doesn't matter if it's a whole number or a fraction, as long as that variable remains constant. Okay? How about here? Okay. Well, now we've got m's all the way across. But if you expand that form, if you take m squared and m cubed, are they the same variable? No. So what's the rule we could add? That in a like term, the variable must remain constant. Negative or positive doesn't matter, nor does a whole term or fraction. And an exponent must be the same as well. Okay? Let's do one more. Give me one more thing. By the way, you notice what we're always doing. Does our reasoning still hold? Check your reasoning to here. Add one more piece to our definition. So first of all, does our reasoning still hold? Okay. Can you tell me one more rule that set reveals to us? Order doesn't matter. As long as that exponent remains attached to the same variable, the order doesn't matter. By the way, notice what we're doing is this is what I mean. I'm teaching content right now. I'm teaching the concept of a like term, but I'm not writing the definition up for you to copy down. You're thinking it through. We might together write down, and we'll walk out with the definition, but this is what I mean by saying, can I teach content that engages thinking? All of our subjects, by the way, teaching rules in language. This is using it properly, this is using it improperly. I'm not going to tell you the rule, you're going to figure out the rule, but these are all correct and these are all wrong. Find the pattern. This is all about pattern seeking. Okay? As you learn about, in chemistry, as you look at these, why have I sorted them this way? So almost anything we do, we can teach content through this approach. Let me show you now. Now this is a high school example, but I want to show you, students had a lot of fun with this. How many of you know who Groot is? Okay, for those of you who don't, this is from a movie called Guardians of the Galaxy. And Groot is, I don't know how to describe Groot. He's like a very tall tree, but he also walks and talks and, well, he says, I am Groot. And we asked students at the beginning, first day, they were doing a cellular unit, is Groot more plant or animal? And let me show you what we gave students to respond. We used a dashboard. And students had to decide, day one, no pre-teaching, this is my diagnostic. I want to see if you had to put this by the way, if you never knew Groot, I'd have to show you a 5-minute clip. You'd see Groot walking around and so on. Is Groot much more animal than plant? Somewhat more animal, but there are some plant elements, of course. More plant than animal, or much more plant? Students draw in, well, you know what? I would argue this right now. Okay, fair. Tell me why. As we start getting into our cellular unit, I'm going to take you back every few days or every week. We're going to come back at the end of a class and say, anyone change their mind? What new evidence have you gathered that would cause you to say, well, actually, he obviously has a respiratory system and a digestive system because we saw this evidence. Therefore, that. But notice what I did is I launched with my provocation. I don't end with it. And every class I teach, I take them back and say, has anyone changed their mind? My diagnostic up front, I want to see what students think very first, 10 minutes into the next 3 weeks, I can see where students are. And we start to surface things. Let me show you just a couple of other examples. We call this one a where do you draw the line? And the way we set this up with students, we said a basic human right is the right to life. Everyone agree with that? A right to life is a basic human right. Denying a child access to food jeopardizes their life, and therefore denying food to children should be seen as a violation of their basic rights. So at what point do we draw the line? And where you're going to draw the line, you are saying we have an obligation to take action. So if I have all the food I want, what if I have 3 meals a day, but there are no extras? Is that a violation of my basic rights? 2 meals a day and they're not always healthy. 1 meal a day. Virtually no food. Where do you draw the line? Remember, where you're drawing the line, you are saying the world has an obligation to act because this is violating this child's basic right. This is what's called to judge the better or best. Okay? Here are a range of options. What would you pick? Imagining, and we do this at the beginning, we see where our students line up, we begin to explore issues of human rights, of sustainability, sustenance, whatever it might be. Has anyone shifted their position and why? By the way, using this in climate change. Personally, I always remember, I think 2008, before the collapse, the economic collapse, healthcare was the #1 issue among Canadians and the climate was #2. And then we had an economic, right? And suddenly climate change falls off. And I find myself saying, so how bad does it have to get? Where do you draw the line on climate change before you're willing to say, okay, I have to take serious action? Because it seems that the economy trumps it every time, right? In fact, the arguments. So where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line on, and think in your subject areas where we could look at a variety of issues, judge the better or best. So I want just for a moment touch on the use of criteria, another tool. So once we tweak questions, and I'm keeping an eye on time, I want to share with you a few things. Making sure our students think about criteria when they're creating a response. When I'm in many schools, elementary and high schools, I can tell you most times teachers use criteria around their assessments. So the most common use is a well-written essay will meet these criteria. A well-written lab will meet these criteria. What we often fail to do is build criteria for the issue I want you to think about. I want to show you as an example, and then I'll back up in a moment. I pulled this from, my daughter had to write a paper a year or two ago comparing 2 studies. To critically assess the strength of the studies by Reich et al. In support of equal cross-modal potential and Lewis et al. In support of different cross-modal connectivity, it is important to consider the scope of these studies, the quality of the experimental methods used, and the consistencies of the results across various tasks. By the way, what I want you to notice, she cited 3 criteria. So the way she built her paper is I will first look at the scope of the studies, how wide or narrow were they. I'll look at the quality of the methods used and the consistency. Each one of those became a section of her paper where she approached it. This allowed her to make sense, to organize her information by first saying, how would I determine, what would my criteria be to assess the strength of a study? If I have, this was a critique the piece, or sorry, a judge the better or best. Here are 2 studies, decide which results, are most trustworthy, whatever. Her immediate mind is to say, well, what's my criteria I use to base it? If you follow the rest of her paper, you will see. So section 1, I'll deal with this criteria. This is the evidence that fits that criteria. I now develop that section. I move to my next section. Criteria became her organizing feature. Right? But I'm getting her to always think about, if you're going to make this judgment, what's the criteria that's going to guide you in making that judgment? Okay? So I wanted to show you that as we look at, and I want to show you one other piece when we look at criteria, because there's 2 different types of criteria. In fact, before I do this piece, let me just pause, and because they're descriptive and qualitative. Let me give you an example of descriptive. Can you run for President of the United States? Why not? Okay. If you moved to the U.S. and took out American citizenship, could you run? Can she run? Why not? You have to be a natural-born American citizen, and you have to have resided there. You can't have lived outside of the U.S. and then come back and run 6 months later. Am I right? Something like that? Something like that. Okay. By the way, are these criteria? Yes. These are what we call descriptive criteria. Have I made a judgment about your leadership? When you say, I'm Canadian, oh, you can't run. Am I making a judgment about you? No. Descriptive criteria are binary in nature. Are you American? No, can't run. Okay? There's no judgment in that. Qualitative, would you make a good president? What do you look for in effective leadership? What would you look for? When you decide who to support in an election, what are you looking for?
How well they use their Twitter account.
Okay, Twitter usage. Give me another one. What do you look for? Integrity. Effective communicator, perhaps? A vision that they can speak to. By the way, notice these are not binary. These are not yes, no. These are judgments I have to make. When we're talking to our students about criteria, I want to be clear. Notice descriptive. If I ask you to develop a set of research notes that are 5-page, 10-page, I don't care what it is. In high school, I don't know if you see this much in university, some students think if I give you more, I should get a better mark. Giving me more bad work is just more bad work for me to read. It doesn't get you a better mark. Increasing the amount. Your research notes should be comprehensive and reflect a variety of perspectives. Now, I want to be clear. If you want to say in your assessment, at this level, by a third-year course, I expect you using at least 15 sources to gather your research. Fine, tell kids I want 15 sources. But don't expect to get an A because you use 15 sources. Does that make sense? Like, I have no problem giving kids clear direction. But you get an A if the sources you've used are reliable and relevant and reflect a variety of perspectives. So I could have 15 sources, all from the same perspective, many of them not credible, some not even relevant, but I've got 15 sources. So I want students to understand quantities will never get you a top mark. By the way, if you hand it in and you've got 7 sources and I ask for 15 in your bibliography, I'm handing it back and saying I asked for 15. Finish your job, you're not done. Right? So if I ask you to write a paper of a certain length, fine, tell kids it has to be a certain length. In fact, sometimes it has to be shorter. I don't want more than 1,000 words. You've handed in 1,500. Go tighten it up. Right? But that is not an issue of quality. That's not ABC. That's did you do what I asked you to do. Okay? When you write an article for a journal, they will tell you, you have this much space. And if you go over it, we don't have room to publish it. You've got to pare it back. By the way, if I wrote a paper bang on the right length, that doesn't mean it's a great paper. It means it meets the length. So I want to be very clear to students both what you're required to do, but what does excellence look like? Okay? And separate those 2 out. What does excellence look like? And let me just show you one other application of this. Do some of you, Steve Jordan, and anyone know Steve? Do you know Steve? Right? So Steve developed is it called Pure Scholar? I forget, there's a high school version that's different. It's called Pure Scholar and Cognito, those are the 2 words. Okay. I think what he was doing is really nicely looking at how do we get more peer feedback. So I wanted just to show you, Any peer feedback is always critical thinking. Okay? Peer feedback is always critical thinking because presumably there's a set of criteria. When I ask you to read over my paper for me and give me some feedback, presumably there's a set of criteria that we would use to say, this is what constitutes a good paper. Read my paper in light of this criteria. So we developed a set of criteria for good feedback. If we're going to invite peers to read each other's work, your comment should always be respectful. We're never insulting or condescending because the point is we're trying to help each other. They should always be warranted. Your comments, whether you're praising my work or questioning the work, they shouldn't be trivial. You shouldn't be looking for, I asked you to look at do my ideas make sense, and you gave me feedback on my usage of commas. But I didn't ask you to copy edit, I asked you to look for the ideas. They should be specific comments. Oh, this paper is brutal. Well, I'm not sure how respectful that is. It's also not specific. It's not helpful to tell me it's a really bad paper. What's not working, and by the way, the intent should be to be constructive. Okay? Now, if you have a small enough class, one of the things that we will often do is have you say, groups of 3, I want each of you are going to share your paper. So you're up first, you're going to hand over your paper, you're going to read it and give feedback. And you're going to use, remember we're looking for, is it well written, is it clearly, usage of evidence, whatever. But you're going to listen to how she gives feedback and give feedback on the feedback. And as students listen and say, well, I thought your tone was respectful and your comments were warranted, but they were a bit vague. I wonder if you could have given more detail and perhaps offered a few more concrete suggestions. Then we rotate and each takes a turn. If we can get our students to be good at giving feedback, I don't know if I have often found students don't want to give feedback. They want to just praise their friend. Right? Well, you didn't help me. My paper was a B, and you told me it was great, and I handed in and got a B. If you really want to be my friend, learn how to give me useful feedback so my work gets better as a result. But we find that our students have to be trained to do that. And by having them listen to other people's feedback and give feedback on feedback, we can get them better at it over time. So I'm going to shift gears for the last 15 minutes in a kind of odd way. How many of you have played Angry Birds? I'm glad to see you do because it's a physics game, right? I mean, it's a physics. So I would have been disappointed if you hadn't. How many of you, does everybody know a bit about Angry Birds? A little bit? At its height, it was being played 200 million hours a year around the world. Okay? 200 million hours of people launching those birds at those pigs. I love the way you're shaking your head. Because my wife did the same thing. She said, why do you waste so much time on that stupid game? Right? When I came back in the room a bit later, she said, sorry, I bumped you up 2 levels. I said, I thought it was a stupid game. She said, it's kind of addictive. Right? This got me thinking, and I just want to finish today with this piece. I got wondering, what is it that game developers understand that we maybe should be paying attention to? Because somehow, game developers know how to get people to commit large amounts of time. How do I do that in a classroom setting? And my answer came, I was doing a keynote talk in Madrid, and it was at a brain research conference, and the speaker before me was talking about sustained attention. How do we get students sustained attention? And she talked about paying attention connects to the pleasure center of the brain. You pay attention to something that has meaning, relevance, interest. It is hard to pay attention to something I see no value, no interest, I'll never use this. Sitting through a 3-hour lecture on something I don't care about, I have no use for, is hard. Right? So we have to find a way to connect to that. By the way, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that connects to the pleasure center of the brain. When you get a shot of dopamine, you have that sense of satisfaction. She pointed out, for example, that coffee is a natural dopamine booster. Watch almost any coffee commercial. What's the look when they take their sip? You got a shot of dopamine. Chocolate is a dopamine booster. Right? Anyone crave chocolate? Right? Just chocolate-covered coffee beans, like for those really tough days. Right? But here's what really fascinated me. She said another major source of dopamine is being successful at achieving a challenge. Do you know that? Yes, I got it. Right? You get that rush. By the way, think about games. Has anyone played a game called 4 Pictures in a Word? You're given 4 images, a series of letters, some blank spaces, and you have to figure out what word you can make out of those letters that would connect those 4 pictures together. Okay? And if you start playing it, it'll start with 4 easy pictures and 3 letters. And you'll go, oh, this is easy, I can do this. Then it'll go to 4 or 5. It'll get more and more complicated. You'll get stuck. It'll be really tough. What do you think the one after you get stuck is like? When you get unstuck, what do you think the next one's like? Is it another hard one or an easy one? Yeah. Because they understand if you stay stuck, you keep getting harder, you'll quit. They suck you back in by throwing some easy ones at you. By the way, when you played Angry Birds, tell me if I'm wrong, but it'll get harder and harder each, right? And then they'll add a new bird. But it's pretty easy again. It gets harder and harder. They're drawing you back in. Was that? Yes. Yeah. And you've got, and by the way, if it's too hard, I'll quit. So notice, when we start looking at how we engage learning through inquiry, the research tells us our students need to be successful, have some chance of success. I told you I was in Peru earlier. I did a same activity with some educators in Peru around tell me the month, day of the week, time of day. I did not use the picture I used with you. They would have no context. They would have no chance. They wouldn't be able to do it. I used a picture of a woman in the Andes herding alpacas. I had no idea. They taught me so much. They could tell me all kinds of things about the season. I had to have something that they could access so they could do the thinking. Right? They had to have some chance of success. Now, what's this got to do with what you do? Well, I want to show you very briefly. I think too often in education, we use our assessments as proof of learning. And what I mean by that is we teach stuff, and then we say, prove you've learned what you're supposed to learn by completing this task. So I'm going to teach stuff, and then you're going to do this task, which will prove you've learned it. And I want us to think about, what if we turn that inside out and made the task the invitation to start the learning? Okay? And what if my lectures, what if my classes were a place where you came to learn more that would help unlock? And let me show you what this looks like a little bit. Just a few. I call this a cascading curriculum. And what we mean by that is the learning cascades from, and I'm going to loop you back to the beginning, Jeff Scott saying you want to problematize around rich questions and then have sub-questions. I forget his term right now. I've got an overarching questions, and I'm going to have what we call 4 lines of inquiry. This was a physics class. My daughter came home. She said, we have to explain in baseball what causes a curveball to curve and why it's hard to hit. Now that struck me as a pretty good question for grade 11. Right? So why is a curveball curve and why is it hard to hit? So I called up her teacher and I said, do you mind if I come in and talk to you? I'm intrigued. And he said, yeah, come on in. And we started talking. First of all, I want you to know, as we talked, I said, I realized, where is that question asked in the unit, beginning, middle, or end? Where do you think he asked it? The beginning of the unit, middle, or the end of the unit? He asked it at the end. The last 3 days of the unit, you have to answer this question. Notice that I've taught you all this physics. Now prove you understand it by answering this hard question. I said to him, what if we turn that inside out? What if they walked in the first day, you showed a picture of a curveball curving, slowed down, and does anyone carry, can I steal your book for a second?
Sure.
Just the book.
What do you want?
The book. Right?
Oh, the book, yeah.
We give kids a little book like this. We call it a thought book. I said, take out your thought book. I don't care if you draw me a picture, write an equation, describe in words. Why do you think that curveball just curved? Set it aside. Okay? Talk to write your answer, set aside. I said to the teacher, tell me what my daughter needs to understand if she's going to answer your question. He said, well, she'll have to understand acceleration due to gravity. He went through 4 big concepts. If she gets these concepts, she'll nail that answer. I said, How would you help her understand acceleration due to gravity? Well, I do this lab, we do this lesson. Here are the 3 or 4 things. Basically, we back mapped his unit so that launch by asking her the question, teach her about acceleration due to gravity, invite her after each class to take out yesterday's answer. Do you want to change it, revise it, add to it? Are you on the right track? Like, what if instead of saying, take all the learning over a month, now answer a question, what if she began answering the question, and every lesson she comes to, every lecture she listens to, her answer grows, gets refined. By the way, think of the collaborative talk that goes on among students. What did you get from today that leads us to this? Let me show you this. Actually, I want to show you a short video. This is from my daughter's first year biology, second term class. I'll just show you a little bit of it. Some of you are probably familiar. It's a Harvard video. I'll show you a wee bit of it. It's called the inner life of a cell. So they were showing this the first day, and she was enthralled. She was like, wow, this is such an amazing video. And the question she was asked the first day, how many cellular processes can you find in this video? How many cellular processes can you find in this video? And by the way, then the professor said, if you understand my course, you'll find 16 by the end of the course. When I asked my daughter, how many could you find? She said, 3 or 4. By the way, know the diagnostic for the professor. How many can you guys find? Which ones you see? Okay, I know what you know already. I know what the gaps. Halfway through the course, they watch the video 2nd time. At the end of the course, 3rd time. I'm going to tell my daughter watch it each week. She'd rewatch it, and she'd go, yes, 2 more. Okay, up to 6 now. Okay? It's that, remember I told you that little dopamine rush? Yes, found 2 more. Okay? I love the way this video was used, not at the end. Okay, if you've been paying attention to this course, you should be able to find 16 in there now, go. I love the way it's used the first day. The challenge was set up front. And every time you come to class, you should be able to find another one. By the end, you should be able to find it. If you can, you're in good shape. Okay? What a lovely way. There's that launch with that question, and each week, you look at another, just keep going deeper and deeper into it. Let me just for a moment, this is a grade 2 example, my apologies, but it sets up something. I was asked to do a lesson with children on growth and change in animals. And I'm the first lesson in the growth and change in animals, and we asked them, if you need to help a baby animal, a place to grow up safe and healthy, what might the enclosure look like that you would create for it? And each child, would you guys take the giraffe, and you guys the polar bears, you guys the monkeys, each were given an animal, and we gave them a thought. And we said, okay, draw me your enclosure, 5 minutes in, no pre-teaching. This is what one little boy drew. He had the monkey stage. He's got a banana here, ooh-ah, tire swing. That's his monkey stage. Now what I want to show you, in this idea of a cascade, we asked the question, we gave them the challenge they were going to have. Okay, well the next week we're going to look at what animals need to meet their physical needs. Then we're going to explore how they'll get exercise. Then we're going to think about the foods they need and how we need to care and handle. What I want to show you is every few days the children were invited to go back in their thought book. What would you add? This is the same little boy a few days later. He begins to think about, oh, I forgot this piece, I need to add this. Over time, this became more and more complex. When I went back to visit the children, they had a book full of it. It's now a university level. If you were to write a story, by the way, you're writing in French, you don't know it, write it in English, write it in whatever language you want. By the end, you'll be writing that. Okay? So instead of saying when you get to the end, remember everything we've learned in this language acquisition, now writing the story, start writing the story and start to transform it as you learn. Start writing it. If you don't know it in English, we'll learn it over time. Get me thinking. I just wanted to show you the finished shot. I'm showing young children. I've used the term thought books. I have to tell you, I created the term thought book, not the idea. This is J.K. Rowling planning on her Harry Potter series. I want students to see thinking is messy, writing is messy, make mistakes, cross things out. I need a space to think, muck about. It's okay to make mistakes. We got Isaac Newton's early draft. How many scientists have carried around a journal of some kind where they make notes, they cross things out, they change their mind. This is what I think students need to do on a routine basis in every subject. Just allow me to think, try things out. Allow me to go, hey, that didn't work. So let me just wrap it up, and then a few questions. From an assessment lens, which is where we started this, allowing students to have the space to muck about, capture ideas, change their mind. Notice who the first assessor is. Every day I deliver a lecture, it's not me, it's the student who takes out last week's answer and goes, oh, that answer actually doesn't make sense. Okay, what are you going to change? The first line of assessment is the student, not us. Every time you learn in my class, you'll have a chance to go back to your answer, decide if you want to refine it, add to it, change it, keep it the same. Okay. Depending on the size, and by the way, this may be more at the TA if you have a large class. As an instructor, by the way, I would never mark a thought book. I would never collect these. These are not something to be marked because that would kill the purpose. This is meant to be a student's place to play around with, muck about, try things out. But if I were in a smaller group setting, I'm going to come by each day and I'm going to pick up a few and I'm going to have a look and I'm going to see. This is what we call just-in-time. It's on-the-fly assessment. I take a look at a handful. I can see there are some gaps or misunderstandings. I need to make, next class I need to address that. Maybe I'm realizing there's a few students who are really stumped on this. I need to say, you need to come and see me after because there's some confusion. This allows me to have insights that allow me to offer the support kids need. And lastly, we use it in assessment increasingly to triangulate our assessment data. The little boy I showed you, when I went back, the teacher said, go look at his model. And she said, the model he built's not very good, but his thought book's brilliant. So what if the science is really well understood? I'm just not a good model. So what we're trying to do in this is when we triangulate our assessment data, through observations and conversations, through things captured in this thought book. I'm not marking it, but I can see you have a deep understanding of the subject matter. And you took a chance on crafting something that didn't quite work out the way you hoped. That doesn't necessarily mean you didn't understand it. And so I can make a professional call now to say, that end product, is a B, but I'm giving the student an A- because I have evidence that suggests the learning is deeper than the end product suggests. So this becomes a tool that allows me to make sure that my body of evidence is consistent. By the way, I think if we are serious about innovation and creativity, we can't just mark end products. Because how many people in life, whether it's the sciences, the arts, have taken a risk on something, it didn't work. It doesn't mean they didn't understand writing. It doesn't mean they didn't have authors ever put out a book that flopped. But we don't suddenly say, well, you're no longer a good writer. Well, no, you took a chance, it didn't work. Have scientists tried something, well, that didn't work. But do I have proof that you understood the science that changed the product? So anyway, I'll leave that with you to think about. So there's a couple of messages in there. If we have rich tasks, we use them to drive the learning. We build content knowledge through engaging thinking. And we allow students the opportunity by putting our assessments early on. Let them muck about, let them make mistakes, and learn through their mistakes. When we put the assessment at the end, we miss that opportunity to learn from mistakes, because now it's all, I see this a lot when my daughter's scrambling because this is due on Friday. She's got to get it, well, this weekend it was due midnight, not 12:01, but midnight. Right? And I kind of watch going, is this really assessing the quality of her thinking or the efficiency with how quickly, and when she gets stuck because her software is not working, should that really cause her mark to drop 20%? Because, what do we measure? And I understand having a deadline, but midnight, was someone marking it at 12:15? Because I'm not really sure why getting it at 8 a.m. would have mattered. Anyway, those are other conversations. This is an attempt to say if we put it up front, students are thinking about it throughout, we see less of that scrambling, and we don't find out late that they're struggling, we find it early, and we can better step in. It's 1 o'clock. I'm happy to take any questions or individual. I hope there were useful pieces. As I said, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. Thanks so much for coming.